Chat, I've asked my subscribers to submit decks on my Discord server, decks that you guys want my feedback on, basically, for the upcoming TCG format, and we have assembled quite the list. If your deck or your specific deck list is not going to make it into the deck doctor, don't worry. We're going to talk about every single deck type at least once, right? So, like, for example, there's been like 11 Tearlaments decks submitted. We're not gonna go over every single Tearlaments deck. We're just gonna go over one or two. I'm gonna give you guys my opinion on some of the different engines in Tearlaments, and then you can like extrapolate from that for your personal Tearlaments list, right? That's how we always do it. There's simply no way I can just go over like 10 Tearlaments decks, because at some point it's just gonna be way too repetitive, right? So the wonderful Skrelpling has helped me set up the Google form and sort all the entries. Shout outs to Skrelp. As always, I've asked you guys to submit a dueling book deck list, as well as giving me some extra input, like what type of deck are you playing, what level are you trying to participate in, because, you know, deck building can change depending on, am I just going to play with friends, am I just going to bring it to locals, do I want to play at regionals with it, or do I plan to play at like the highest level of competition, right? Like YCS nationals, whatever, right? And that's always important. And then I've given people a thing where they can give me extra info of like, you know, I'm not playing this card because of budget reasons, or I'm playing a lot of back row removal in my main deck because my locals is full of stun Andes or whatever, right? These type of informations that would be helpful when evaluating a specific deck list, right? And so we begin with Tearlaments Strongest. We have a clean 40 card Cash Tira Ishizu Tearlament list is what they called it. I'm seeing a card that I don't really know. Oh, okay. It's because you're citing the Shadow Fusion package. All right. It outs Noir. Well, it makes them unable to activate it, right? It's still unaffected, though. A couple things right off the bat. I like a lot that you kept it 40 cards. I think that is one advice to Tearlaments in general that I would give you guys. I think the deck should be as close to 40 cards as possible. The deck will struggle with consistency otherwise. The only card that's like kind of off to me is Change of Heart, which is a good card against the Unchained matchup, but in other matchups, I would think you could play better cards. Something like a Talents will probably suit you better. The other thing is, I don't really get why there's such a big focus on Rhinoheart in this deck right now, because the one thing I don't like about Rhinoheart is that it does not make a fusion by itself. Rhinoheart in general is in a very weird position in Tearlaments right now, simply because it's a great mill, but you really don't want to draw it. Yes, you can go normal summon Rhinoheart, send Tearlaments Kashtira, and just mill 2 cards, but the chances that those mill 2 do anything for you, I think, are too small. The Kashtira package, I'm a big fan of, honestly. Wraithsoth, Fenrir, and Tearlaments Kashtira, I think, is a great package. You could even consider playing more Wraithsoth, because I think just opening Fenrir into Tier Cash is phenomenal. I think that's a very strong opener. I don't love Super Poly right now in the meta. You're playing this thing for it. Dragon Synchro Monster plus Warrior Monster. What is this against? Mannadium. I guess if you are playing Super Poly, I don't hate playing Dracoequist if it covers Mannadium, but I don't love Super Poly in general right now. King of the Swamp has been a weird card for me, simply because in all of the games that I've played with Tearlaments, and I've played a decent amount. I wouldn't say I've tested the deck like a lot, but I've played a decent amount of games with Tearlaments, both on stream and off stream. I have not really been making great use of polymerization. Going first, it's not really been good for me. Going second, I have very, very often had the problem that the deck just doesn't have enough monsters for me to go into Guardian Chimera effectively. And just now looking at, you're not even playing Guardian Chimera, which is like the only reason why I would even like polymerization going second. So what I have been thinking is you can either not play King of the Swamp, which is possible. However, I have some issues with that because I'm not sure if your end boards are strong enough if you don't have access to Rulkalos or Grapha. So in that sense, I like King of the Swamp. I just didn't like drawing it, and I hated drawing Poly. So I thought maybe you can just cut the Poly and just play it as like a good mill. And then in that case, you wouldn't even play King of the Swamp, right? You would play Beast King of the Swamp because it's a level 4, which is better, and it's slightly stronger. And they're both Aquas. I don't hate playing like 1 or 2 of those. I don't think I would go with 3 King of the Swamp plus Poly anymore after testing it a little bit. The side deck is fine in my book. If you're doing this, I would probably recommend just main decking some amount of Shaddolls and then siding Shaddoll Fusion on top for going second is actually a pretty good idea. I don't hate that at all. Phantasme is solid, I think. I think your list is solid. I just think there's a couple of choices that are slightly suboptimal, right? I don't think Rhino is the optimal normal summon. I don't think King of the Swamp is that great. I don't think Super Poly is the best non-engine. I don't think Change of Heart is the best non-engine. But overall, the deck building principles here are sound. It's fine. It's just that I think you could be playing some better cards in those slots in terms of engine and non-engine wise. That's something I noticed just now. The side deck doesn't really have anything for Flu, which is probably not very good for the current format. You probably need something for Flu. Either you just play Banshee and Zombie World if you really want to specifically target Flu as best as you can. Those two cards are like the best ones against Flu by far. But if you want a card that's maybe like a little more overall use, I think you can play Drolan Lockbird in your side deck very well. It's good against Flu, but it also covers some of the combo piles. And I always like when Flu decks and all those combo piles, I don't consider them meta threats, like top tier. You're going to play like 4 of them at a YCS. Probably not, but it feels really good to have them all covered with one card, right? You don't want to overcommit your deck to decks that are not going to be that popular, because my guess, 12 rounds YCS Dortmund, probably not going to be more than like 1 Flu on the Reese if you're unlucky, 2, maybe 1 combo pile as well. You don't want to over prepare for those decks, but you also don't want to completely disrespect them because it could very well still happen, right? I like to be on like the cards that are just covering a lot of those matchups together, right? And that's something that Drolan Lockbird, I think, does really well for this current format. Let's do one more that has a couple other interesting cards in it. Yeah, this one it's perfect. With those two, I think we'll cover most of our bases. Okay, here we have another engine that's in here that I personally find very, very interesting. The tuning package with Revolution Synchron. What you do with these cards, basically, for anyone in chat, is you try to put a level 4 monster onto the field, and then you can synchro with the Revolution Synchron from your hand into an Ancient Fairy Dragon, and then use the Ancient Fairy to special summon from your hand, or use the Ancient Fairy Dragon to replace one of your field spells. Go from there, get the other free field spell, bring back the Revolution Synchron, and make Visa's Armichara. You can make Crystal Wing. You can also make Dragite. I don't know why there's no Crystal Wing in here. I think Crystal Wing is better than Dragite, but okay. The nice little bonus there, it's not always gonna matter, but I don't think it's insignificant either, is that if you start with tuning, you get to mill 2 cards, right? You mill 1 for tuning and you mill 1 for Revolution Synchron. If just one of those 2 mills is a good hit, like 1 Saliak, 1 Trivi Karma, 1 Scream, 1 Tearlament Name, 1 Tearlament Kashtira, 1 Mali, 1 Destrudo, Kelbeck, Agido, Mudora, Keldo, it suddenly turns into like insane value. So that's what I like about these cards, and just like the consistent access to your field spells, right? Because one of the best parts about tier in the TCG is that we still have 3 Purrely Rhino. I think if you play this engine though, I've been thinking about playing more Wraith Soth. Starting with Wraith Soth is really, really good because you go Wraith Soth, add Fenrir, special Fenrir, add tier cash. Later on, Ancient Fairy, pop Wraith Soth, get Purrely Rhino. That's pretty much the best possible way it could go. In a version like this one, I would be trying to fit more Wraith Soth. And here's the problem with the Revolution Synchron package. 2 main problems. The first problem is main deck space. The second problem is extra deck space. Because look at the amount of synchros you want. But the even bigger problem is that Revolution Synchron does not work with the, in my opinion, best normal summon for Tearlaments, and that is Diviner. I'm actually surprised both lists that we've looked at so far did not have Diviner of the Herald. I think Diviner is probably the best and most synergistic Tearlament normal summon now. Milling 5 cards is just always going to be good for you. There's like almost no way you mill 5 and don't get a +1 or +2 out of it. And also Diviner being a level 6 tuner, it makes Baron and it makes Beatrice, which are probably the 2 best tools in the extra deck that Tearlament has available right now. I've been a huge fan of Diviner, and that has just been conflicting with Revolution Synchron, right? Like you open Diviner and Revolution Synchron, they don't do anything together, right? That's been my biggest conflict. The one card I have not been liking a lot, the other list also had it, but it's Trivi Karma. I don't hate it per se. I feel like every single card in this deck that has a graveyard effect is like also fine to draw. Trivi Karma, the problem is if you draw that card, you cannot really do anything with it. right? I don't think I would personally be playing triple Beast King of the Swamps. I think either you play less, you could play 0, that would also be okay if your boards are still good enough without like Grapha on it. That's one thing you have to realize. Cutting King of the Swamp or Beast King of the Swamps will make your extra deck a lot less tight. I'm a big fan of the hero package. I would even go as far as to you should probably play Denier as well. I like the malicious Denier Beatrice package. I think it's great. I think it gets a lot better if you play Diviner though, like a lot better. You can still make Beatrice consistently, but it's been way more consistent with Diviner for me. Let's read the text that they sent. Went back and forth a bunch of times between the rev and non-rev version. I decided this was better, but also decided Beatrice was still necessary, hence the weirdly tight extra. Okay. Black Rose is absolutely incredible and people don't expect it. Normal summon Ishizu suddenly contests the whole board. That is true. Revolution Synchron into Black Rose is like a sleeper kind of thing that people don't really respect. Your opponent normal summons level 4. You're not going to suspect them freaking turning into turbo mode Black Rose your entire board in just a millisecond. That's cool. The mills are not as great as the other more pure version, but this has more gas and protection against Bestial's other interruptions. You see, this is the thing about playing stuff like Revolution Synchron. Revolution Synchron is very much not focused on Gamba, right? Revolution Synchron is a very controlled line because you're gonna go activate field spell, normal summon level 4, make Ancient Fairy, search the other field spell, make like Crystal Wing or whatever, or Armitara to search whatever, right? It's very controlled, except for the random tuning mill or random Revolution Synchron mill, right? Everything else is pretty much like a guaranteed line. And I know that feels good, and that's also why it feels good to me, but that might just be the reason why it doesn't make the cut in Tearlaments. Because Tearlaments, maybe you're not supposed to play it that way. Maybe you're not supposed to play it that way. Let's see if we have one Diviner deck list. Oh, okay, we do. Hold up. Tearlaments greatest. I've opted for the Mikanko engine in tier for Beatrice reasons, of course. It also feels nice going second, as just Ohime can put a fair amount of pressure on a board with Reflection Rondo. Additionally, I'm trying to high roll with Orange Light, and for the reason the fairy count is higher with 3 Diviner, for example. Baron is definitely the 16th card in the extra deck. Oh, there's no Baron, okay. First off, love the triple Diviner. Love the Ohime. It's funny, because last week we played Ohime in Master Duel, and I actually was a big fan of it, and I somehow didn't even think about including it in the TCG. But I think it makes total sense. Now that I'm seeing it, I'm like, yeah, why did I not think about even playing Ohime? That seems cool. I like that. The one thing I disagree with is the Herald of the Orange Light. I don't think Herald of the Orange Light like needs to be played just because you have some other fairies in your deck. The problem here is basically Herald of the Orange Light with an Ishizu card, great. Herald of the Orange Light with Ohime or Diviner, not that good, honestly. Like, yes, it's a strong hand trap, but like, you don't want to discard those pieces. Those are your best combo pieces in this deck. Those are your starter cards, right? Your Ohime and your Diviner. That's the card you need to get going in this version. This seems like the perfect version to play like Malicious in. You're playing Trivikarma without Foolish Burial Goods even. I don't like that. I would say cut the King of the Swamp, cut the Herald of the Orange Light, cut the Poly, and play some better mills like the Mallies, maybe the Denier, that kind of stuff. I think give this deck a little bit more gas. And it absolutely 100% needs Baron. Like, a deck with Diviner needs Baron. You could max out Sulliak too, since Mikanko sends for effect. Yeah. That's another thing. You don't have that many great discards for Ohime. You could definitely play like 3 Sulliak. That's one thing I love about tier in this format. There's like so many possibilities, right? There's just so many things you can do. We've now looked at 3 Tearlament decks, and they've all been so fundamentally different. It's so interesting to look at. I hope this gave you like a solid overview of what I think of all the engines for tier, right? Let's move on to a different deck. I feel like we spent like 30 minutes on Tearlaments, and I do not regret any of it. Next up, we have Runick variations. Let me say a thing or two about Runicks in general. I've been getting a lot of questions about Runicks for the current format because, you know, I'm kind of like the Runick guy, I guess. I personally don't think Runicks are in the best spot right now. I don't hate them. I could never. I think they're always going to be somewhat okay. But right now, I don't think they have the most favorable matchups in the format. Unchained is like the big problem for Runick, I think, because Flashing Fire destroys monsters, which is not great for you. Destruction on back row is not very good for you. Baron to clear the board is not super good. It's very tough for Runick to outgrind Unchained. Purrely is kind of okay. You don't really have a native out to Noir, which can be a problem, but you could deck them out if they don't use it. Happy memory is a big problem, because if they go my friend, then you have destruction for it and it resolves. It's great. But if they have happy memory, suddenly it's a super bad trade for you. It can come down to those small interactions very, very often. On top of that, Runick doesn't have a lot of room for non-engine, and I think that's a problem in this format, simply because against Purrely, you kind of want to stop them before they get to Noir, otherwise you're going to have a rough time. Against Unchained, it's very hard to grind engine versus engine. I think Unchained, actually, if it goes first and pulls off its combo, I think you lose. I think the engine is stronger in the grind game than the Runicks, because all your shit destroys and they just keep trying to pop your fountain, and it's very annoying. I don't think you can outgrind it. That being said, I still think it can be a very good deck. I still think it can be very threatening when it goes first, in particular. Like, all of those problems literally almost don't exist when you go first with the Runick deck. You can bully Unchained, you can bully Purrely. If you just play the right Runick combo deck and you go first, you're still gonna win. But I don't think that makes it a favorable matchup. That makes it a 50-50 at best. Let's go over some interesting Runick variations that people have submitted. First off, we got a Runick Bestial Synchro deck. You guys know I'm a huge Assault Synchron stan. I've just never been able to find a deck with it that I liked. Well, I liked all of them, but I didn't think they were strong enough. Bestials help to combo off if you've drawn only one Runick addition to their hand trap and board breaking capabilities in the meta. Should Cerberell be cut for something more impactful and so make the deck lean less on the combo going through, considering Denko Sekka in the side? Thank you. Okay. Should you cut Fabled Cerberell? Probably not, because one problem with this deck that I see immediately is that this deck can basically only play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! If it draws Runick plus Tuner. That is in general a problem of Runick Synchro. And Cerberell is kind of like the perfect card for this deck, because you simply discard it for Hugin, you get the free tuner onto the field, right? I think you should be playing the Cerberell. And that's already where the problems start, because having to play this many tuners, having to play this many Runicks, you're left with a very, very small space for non-engine, like we said. And I feel like in your case, you've tried something very interesting, which I think you've tried to make your non-engine partially engine as well. You don't want to just put like 8 hand traps or 8 board breakers, right? Because then you just draw too many bricks, right? And so what you're doing is you're playing Bestials, which are partially hand traps and partially extenders, which is not a bad call, I think. The problem with that is it's going to make your draws a lot smoother, but it's going to feel very suboptimal depending on your matchup, right? Like if you're playing against Branded, this deck is going to feel phenomenal, right? Same against Unchained. I really don't hate the idea here of like making it non-engine and engine at the same time. It's kind of interesting, and there's really not that much I can tell you to change, because like I said, the deck is incredibly tight. Maybe you can consider Serenir. Seems like a decent draw if you don't have Lubellion, right? Summon Serenir, synchro with it, and send the Lubellion. That could be an interesting concept. Your deck is very low on Runick fusions, and Runick synchro decks, especially the Liberian ones, they run out of Runick fusions really, really fast. Like really fast. So that could be a problem here. I probably would say cut the End Punisher for more Runick fusions, like a second Gary probably, or maybe a third Hugin, depending on what you need more. You might not need Omega, but it's good. You definitely need all the level 10s. It's going to be tough with the extra deck space, but I think you need more Runick fusions. But in general, I like the approach here. I don't hate it. I don't think it's like a miracle solution to the format, but I think it's a good deck that you build. All right, we have a Runick Plunder deck. Only one thrust because I only own one. 3 Garys because I often found I need a free level 4 extender to go into Yord. Also, I had a few times that I felt like I needed more than 2. Played Zeus before and it never came up. I don't know if Nip should be the last hand trap, but it's probably better than main deck Droll. Maybe one Redbeard so I can summon it off of Whitebeard when I discard him in the opponent's turn to have another interaction. Alright. Runick Plunder, I think, is worse than other Runick variations based on one simple fact, basically. I think the problem of the Plunder package with Runick is simply that you have 3 Whitebeard and 3 Golden Hair that you want to pair with a Runick spell, right? Those are the ones you want to discard, which is good. But then you have a bunch of them which you don't really want to draw together with a Runick. They only get good in like 2+ combos with multiple plunders. And I think it's just a little bit awkward if you open Runick plus Black Eyes or something like that. It's a very minimalistic plunder package. I haven't played with this, but it seems like you would run out very fast in like grindier games off of the Black Eyes and Bluebeard. Because I remember all of the versions that I played 3 Golden Hair, 3 Whitebeard, and then multiple copies of each of these, like 3, 2, and then even Redbeard. I don't know how that's been working out for you. If it has been working out, then fine, I guess. I like the look of this a lot more than having to play a lot more plunders. 19 Runick quick plays, which is I mean, that's a respectable amount. I respect that. You're playing 9 hand traps as your solution to like non-engine in the format. I think it's fine. I'm a big fan of Ash and Imperm. Nib is in a little bit of a weird spot. I think it's a good card. However, I think it can be a little bit awkward because there is a couple matchups where it just doesn't do that much. The extra deck is also very light on plunder monsters. I see people in chat mentioning that right now. I felt like the combo used Coral Dragon. I think you need that. So that's that. Pretty standard main deck, not much to say about it. Ash and Imperm cover the higher tier decks of the meta. The 2 Spright red in the side are for going first. Main threat of the deck is Droll and Nib, and it suggested to me worked really well and carried last OTS championship. Runick Furhire Spright. The main deck we really don't need to talk about. There's only one thing that I would do differently, and that is I think you need Mayhem Furhire. I think that card is necessary. Even though it looks very clean to have 3 Ash, 3 Imperm, I think this deck just only has room for 5 non-engine. I personally think Mayhem is too powerful. I tend to always prefer board breakers in Runick decks because they feel more impactful. The 2 Slumber 1 Dispelling split. I see people do that a lot when they only have room for 15 Runicks. They only play 2 Slumber 1 Dispelling. The reason for that is that, of course, every Runick is once per turn. You don't want to draw 2 Slumbers. I think it's okay. I personally don't think it's better. I think you should just play 3 Slumbers, but I don't hate the reasoning. Honestly, what I would probably do is I would cut Imperm for Mayhem for hire, I would cut Dispelling for 3rd Slumber, and I would cut the remaining 2 Imperms for 2 Talents. I think that'd be my current version of Runick for hire Spright. I don't like Jet and Starter in the deck. Jet and Starter are cuttable. I haven't played that much without them, but they are cuttable. How do you side going second with such a tight main deck? What engine do you cut? It's very, very tough to side deck with Runick decks going second. You actually side out some amount of engine when you go second. The logic is your deck is built to be consistent when going first, right? So theoretically, going second, you get 6 cards, so you need slightly less engine because you have more cards, so your deck is more consistent by default, right? You don't want to side out too much engine, of course, right? But like Jet, Starter, maybe 1 Fossil Dig or 1 Runick spell, right? That's what you'd usually do. Like against specific matchups, if your opponent is playing a monster heavy deck, you side out Carrot. If you're playing against the back row deck, maybe you side out Red. That's the kind of things you have to do, right? With Runick decks. It's very hard to figure out what to side out. Side deck, I'm a big fan of the Red idea. If you expect people to side deck Droll and Lockbird, I think it's very good to side deck Spright Red for going first. The Wiz has to be there. The Thrust package, I think, is good. I like it. I think it should probably have Feather Duster. I am not a big fan of Evenly and Book of Moon in the side deck, to be honest with you. Extra deck is pretty clean. 1 Folgo is a little sus. Sometimes when you get Evenly, you lose your Folgo, and that sucks. But Evenly is not that popular right now, so maybe it's all right. DD Crow over Bestials to hit Purrely 2. You could do that. And then we have a Life Twin Spright. Right off the bat, there's one thing you need to do, and it is you need to add more Life Twins. I'm sorry. I know you want to be consistent with it. I know you want to have a lot of non-engine, and it feels really good to have a lot of non-engine, but this deck needs more Life Twins. You only have 6 Life Twins. That's not enough. You need more. Probably cut the Evenlies and play 2 Sunny Snitch and a Frost. I know it feels good to have a lot of non-engine in theory, but this deck just doesn't have it, and this deck also doesn't play well with it. It feels so bad to open multiple of these cards when you go first. It feels so bad to draw into Evenly when you resolve Fountain, and Evenly is not even that good in this format. One card that people are already spamming in the chat right now, I think is very, very strong in Life Twin Runick Spright right now in this format, is Forbidden Droplet. This is the one deck where I think absolutely play Forbidden Droplet. It's so freaking good, man. Maybe just play Droplet plus Talents or Droplet plus Nib as your only non-engine. Maybe Droplet plus Ash could also be fine. Droplet plus Talents to not play into Thrust, that could be a thing. If you think people are playing Thrust right now a decent amount, which people are playing it, then you could just go Droplet Talents, break people's board instead of playing hand traps. Could be a very valid approach for this deck. I like it. Your side deck, I like the Ash, because even if you don't main deck it, I think siding Ash for Branded and Lab and other combo decks is pretty good. Siding Bell, what is this for? I think Crow is better, if I had to guess. Resonator, yep. Smashers is good. The side deck is fine. except for I think Bell could be swapped around. An extra deck is just pretty standard. It'd be nice to be able to fit Sleipnir in this deck. The extra deck is so tight. I don't know what you could cut. I haven't been using Sprint very often with this deck. You can probably cut Sprint. I think you just should just play more Life Twins and then cut the Sprint for a Runick Mirror. That's what I like. All right, I'll be right back. Then we do the next deck. Give me a second. We started yesterday and we're continuing today because the stream died yesterday, unfortunately. Let's continue with some branded. As far as I'm concerned, there is like 2 different versions you can play with branded. Obviously the Chimera version, and the other one is like a more standard gimmick puppet kind of version. I'm looking at the submissions right now. I don't think anyone has submitted a pure branded Despia deck. It seems like everyone is preferring the branded Chimera, which honestly, I think I do too. I like that deck a little bit more. Ash is still really good against branded Chimera, but the reason why I think branded Chimera is a little bit better is because it has 2 really important choke points for Ash, right? So you have branded fusion and you have the Baphomet search. Well, your opponent can only Ash one of the 2, even if they have Ash, right? And if you draw a solid hand that has access to both, one of them is going to go through, and that's nice. So let's take a look at it. It looks like a very clean list. The thing about this deck is you have to play like 3 Sword Knight, 3 Kodal, 2 Baphomet, 3 Gazelle. In my opinion, you need the full engine, otherwise you're going to run out. Some people play 2 of the fusion. However, I think playing 3 is pretty good because it's good in the grind game. It's very good to hard open it sometimes, especially if you get hand trapped on like the Baphomet or the Sword Knight. Hard drawing this card can be very, very strong. You're playing the light hex sealed fusion, which I've seen a decent amount of people do. Haven't tried it myself. However, I think it's scary. I don't think it's a bad decision to run it. I think it's fine because it's one quote-unquote brick in your deck for the option of going for Dragoon. Dragoon means they can't keep Ash for Sword Knight. That is a great point, right? Because in this particular deck, if you're playing against branded Chimera, if you have an Ash, you would actually rather Ash this dude or this dude over Ashing branded fusion. Because in this deck, that's the real power play. Like, everyone always autopilots to Ashing Branded Fusion. And I mean, I'm not blaming anyone. Ashing Branded Fusion is still powerful against this deck. But honestly, majority of the times, Ashing this one feels worse for the Branded Chimera player. Like, Ashing this is insane. So if you have both, you can just Branded Fusion first. If they Ash it, they Ash it. At least your Baphomet goes through. And if they don't Ash it, if they want to be smart about it and they want to keep their Ash for the Baphomet, you can just make Dragoon in this version, which can negate the Ash, right? That's one big reason to play this, I think. I'm never a huge fan, like, conceptually of packages where you play like 3 good cards and 1 brick. Aluber is not a hard brick, but it's still pretty bad to draw in this deck because you don't want to spend your normal summon on it, because normal summoning Aluber means you're not going to normal summon your Mirror Sword Knight or Gazelle, which is a problem. Other non-engine, big fan of Ash. Think Ash is very good in this format. Fenrir, pretty good as well. Don't hate it, especially because extra Fenrirs in hand have great usage in this deck. Book of Eclipse is... I think it got a little bit worse from last format. I think it's still okay in this deck in particular. You're not playing Prosperity, which a lot of people are using in this deck. I think it's okay to not play Prosperity because this is one of the decks where going second, Prosperity is a little bit weaker, because going second, you do want to make a Guardian Chimera, and Prosperity going second means you can't make Guardian Chimera on that turn, which is iffy. In this deck, I think you most of the time want a Talents to draw to. So Talents becomes a decent bit worse if you play Prosperity. So I actually don't mind it. I think this list is really clean. The only thing you can swap around is the non-engine, but you've definitely picked non-engine that I like in this format. So I like this list a lot. As far as the side deck goes, Vangu, I'm not sure what the exact combo is. You fuse it away and then revive it. I mean, that's a powerful option. If you're playing Purrely or Fluanderies or something, or Spright, and your opponent does that shit to you, you die. It's kind of troll despair, but interesting. I'm trying to see if there's any matchup you haven't covered with this side deck. It might almost be a little bit too much against Purrely. You could think about cutting some stuff to have better matchups into other decks. D-Barrier and Anti-Spell are scary for this deck. I think you might want Cosmic somewhere to at least cover Anti-Spell. Barrier you can't really do anything about, but I think out of all the fusion decks, the branded Chimera deck is, I don't want to say the best against D-Barrier, but it's probably the least bad. It can still do the Baphomet play, search the Chimera Fusion, and then set the Chimera Fusion, and then maybe survive another turn, right? I'm not a huge fan of evenly matched in this current format. I was looking at most of the top tier decks, and I don't think evenly matched is that great against most of them. No, overall, I really like the construction of this deck. I think the main deck is pretty close to what a branded Chimera deck should look like. The side deck, for the most part, is also pretty good. The extra extra deck, I don't really see any issues. I'm not sure if Mud Dragon is necessary. I've seen a lot of people play a second copy of Albion. Another thing you could do is I've been liking Alba Lenatus simply because I think Dragon Link is still a relatively popular deck and is one of your harder matchups. So having the Alba Lenatus to just blow them out when you have an Albaz is nice. And at the same time, you want something in your extra deck to send for Mirror Jade anyways, right? And Alba Lenatus is fine because it just adds Branded Fusion. That's Chimera. We have something a little more experimental, which is why I'm going to include it in this because it looks pretty fun. This is the Branded Synchro deck, which I think is a pretty dope deck, honestly. I haven't played it myself yet, unfortunately. So I'm not going to go into too much detail of like the engine specifics. Most of this also just seems like it makes sense, right? I'm not sure if this particular deck needs triple Albaz. This deck is probably one of the decks that can get away with 2. We can cut it down to 42 that way. Let's look at the stuff I can talk about. I like Ash, I like Imperm. Nib is kind of iffy for this format, but I think it could pay off. Nib is going to be like sometimes really amazing, sometimes it's going to feel really bad, but that's just Nib in a nutshell for you. It literally just comes down to personal preference. Some people are going to like the experience of Nib. They're just going to accept that sometimes it feels bad, sometimes it feels really good. And some people are looking for more like consistent hand traps, right? Cards that always feel solid. Cards like Crow, Veiler, some shit like that. Side deck, Droll. You can really tell that this is Josh subscribers because I've been telling you guys to side deck Droll and almost every deck has been siding Droll so far. I like it. If we all combine forces for YCS Dortmund, we can make the Fluanderies enjoyers and the combo deck enjoyers suffer, right? We can all collectively just side deck Droll, make it a not very fun experience for them. Extra Bestials might be a bit overkill. You already have 7. How is Encore versus Unchained? There's 3 scenarios where you can side Xyz Encore in the upcoming format. 1, Purrely, obviously. 2, if your deck has a very hard time against the Caesar, you can side it against Unchained. It can be used specifically in decks that lose to Dweller as like a side deck option for like Rescue Ace, because Rescue Ace can pretty much always make Dweller. It's risky because then, you know, you side deck Encore and they go for like Ibly. you like look at your Encore, you're like, ah, cool. It's kind of iffy, right? But theoretically, it can be used for that. We got Purrely next. We're probably just going to look at 1 or 2 different lists because Purrely, for the most part, is like the same kind of deck, right? You have something like this. Generally, you're looking at a mandatory engine of 21 to 23 cards because you're always going to play 3 Lily, 3 Purrely, 1 Delicious, 3 My Friend, 3 Happy, 3 Pretty, 3 Sleepy. So that's 19 cards guaranteed. 1 trap is the minimum, but at the same time also I would argue it's probably the maximum. I don't think you want to play more than 1. So that's 20 card baseline, and then you play 1, 2 or 3 field spells, and then you have between 17 and 19 flex spots where most of the time people are going to do 3 prosperities, and then the rest is just whichever non-engine you prefer. So let's just keep it simple. Let's just evaluate the non-engine you chose because we don't really have to talk about the Purrely cord. Droplet is interesting to me simply because Purrely does have a problem with the Caesar sometimes, and you can also really struggle with the Griffin. So I don't actually hate the inclusion of Droplet. Talents is a little bit iffy in the Prosperity version because I think Talents in Purrely is so good if you can draw. Talents to steal is awkward in Purrely because you don't really want to go into Link monsters in this deck if you can avoid it. Talents to draw is where it's at, but in a Prosperity deck that doesn't always happen, right? So I think Talents is only okay in Purrely. Looking at your opponent's hand can be nice if you get hand trapped. That's pretty good. Imperm is solid in Purrely. The one downside is that when you set up Sleepy Memory draws, you draw Imperm, it feels really bad. Nib, I'm not exactly sure why it's a one-off. I personally think Nib is a card that you should really decide whether you like it or not. If you like it, you should probably play more than 1. If you don't like it, you probably shouldn't be playing it. Crow, I think, is solid. I'm just gonna tell you what I personally think about DD Crow for like my decks for YCS Dortmund, because I'm considering playing Crow. The card is good in almost every matchup. It works against Purrely, it works against Unchained, but it doesn't really ruin them, right? And I'm not sure if it's worth playing into Talents for the effect that DD Crow offers, if you know what I mean. Is Crow good inside then? I think If you want to play Crow, you could side it, but I honestly think you would rather main deck it. There are more impactful cards in the side deck than Crow. The reason to play Crow is because it's so versatile and it does something against everything, right? And those are the type of cards that you would usually rather main deck than side deck, right? Thrust package in the side deck I like. The only thing I don't like is the fact that you're playing evenly matched. I'm not a fan of evenly in Purrely. I think Purrely going second needs its normal summon. I just think the battle phase is a huge advantage in this deck, and I don't know if I want to ever give that up. You only have one happiness and one beauty. I think that's a little sus. I think you want more than that. I don't know if you still need 2 Zeuses. I'm leaning towards no, but I understand why you're doing it. I'm gonna give you guys a tip for cards like D-Barrier and shit. You can play Cross Out to out D-Barrier. That's okay. Most of the time, if you play a deck like Purrely, if your opponent has D-Barrier, they're probably going to win. And that's a thing you probably have to accept. If you don't have Cross Out and your opponent has D-Barrier, I think you just lose. 99% of the metagame, you don't beat with Tryhard. So I don't think you need Tryhard. Instead, you should probably try to play more Beauty and Happy, I think. Especially the second Happiness, I wouldn't feel comfortable without. Let me see if we have a list that's like different from this one. Let's talk about this one real quick. Like I said, the same core for Purrely, but it has Fenrir in the main deck, which I think is good. I think Fenrir is a solid card right now. It creates pressure on the field, but it also creates more cards in your hand. You're playing pretty much no hand traps outside of Ash, which is good against Talents and Thrust, but bad when you draw off of Sleepy Memory. So it's a trade-off, but I can get behind it. So Book of Eclipse in this deck I think is okay because it's good in the mirror match, and against Unchained it solves one of Purrely's biggest issues, which is the Caesar. I don't like the fact that this deck is 41 cards. You can just side deck the Duster and be fine. The reason why I don't love Lava Golem, I think a lot of people in Unchained are gonna play around Nibiru by doing the line from the Jesse video, or the one that Pack presented. I don't know who exactly posted it first, but you know which line I'm talking about, right? The line where instead of ending on Soul of Rage, Caesar, and 1 set, they end on Caesar, 1 set, and Sharvara in hand, which only is 1 monster. You can't Lava Golem that board. All of those cards, 3 Lava Golem and 3 Nib, they all lose to that line, right? And that's risky. The 1 D-Barrier inside, for people in chat asking, I'm assuming is just for Thrust, right? When you get hand trapped, you set D-Barrier. Can work. I've played a decent amount of Purrely at this point, and I've never made this dude, the Dark, for Contact C, but like no one is playing Contact C, right? It seems sus to me to play Contact C right now. It doesn't seem like the smartest decision ever when most decks are prepared for it. Right? Between those 2 Purrely lists, I think I've given you my opinion on most of the available tech cards for Purrely, so I think we should be good here. Next up, we have Mannadium. I'm not going to talk about the Mannadium ratios because honestly, I haven't played the deck enough. All I can say is I think whenever I've played against Mannadium, I liked it, or it looked stronger when they had multiple copies of Rykard, Arrival, and Rykephobia. So I like the 2/2/2 there. Everything else seems standard to me. I like the cross-out plus hand traps approach to Mannadium. Randomly, you can also cross out Fenrir sometimes, I guess. When you go first and your opponent goes Fenrir, or even second, right? You go second, your opponent has Fenrir, you can't play through it, you can cross it out. I don't hate it. Let me see what they wrote. First of all, I have thrusts, but I'm not sure whether to put them in since I don't feel like it has great targets. Thrust is, I think, good in Mannadium for going second. Going first, it doesn't really help you play through hand traps, so I wouldn't main deck it. Main deck, Nibiru and Droll are cross out targets. Thinking about a 3rd Talents and Crow as an answer to Unchained and Purrely. 3rd Talents, you could do that. 3rd Crow, I wouldn't do. I would do the 3rd Ash any day before doing the 3rd Crow. Shifter is a cross-out target for Flu and the Cash Tira matchup, and I'm not so pleased with 3 Dark Ruler, but don't know what I could fit in there. Well, you could just side deck Thrusts, no? Thrust is a pretty good board breaker. Shifter for cross-out is reasonable. 1 Droll is a little bit sus, because I think that card should be a 3-off after siding in most decks. I don't think Bell is that strong in the upcoming format. I think that should probably be another Droll in Lockbird. Pankratops I'm a big fan of. I like Pankratops. Just make the Dark Rulers Thrusts, play 1 Droll and 1 Herald of the Abyss in your side deck, and then you should be a lot better off, I think. All right, now we got Unchained. Look at this Unchained list. 3 Aruhas, 1 Rakea, 1 Sarama, 3 Sharvara, 1 Shiyama, 1 Abominable, which is the standard ratio. And honestly, after a lot of games with and against Unchained, I see no reason to deviate from this ratio. I love Unchained. I think the deck is so cool. I think the way it plays is great. I love the grind game, love the mid-range style, love the form of interaction, like, you know, some interaction in hand, some on the field, some spell and trap, like flexible remove. I love the deck, but I freaking hate the amount of like random one-ofs that you don't want to draw. Requiem is the worst one of all, but also cards like Shiyama, Abominable, Unchained Soul, Fiendish Rhino Warrior, sometimes Sarama, Rakea can be annoying if you already have a normal summon. It can be a very annoying deck to play because you draw hands like that. I've tried cutting this and I just think the Dark Contract is too powerful of a card. The Dark Contract card is everything you want in your deck. Like the card is consistency, the card is extender, the card is removal going second, the card is even a freaking win condition in time. The card is too important in Unchained. I don't think you can cut it. You have to take the risk of bricking with the Requiem. There's no way around it. Dark Contract is too powerful. Tour Guide, also mandatory. Rhino Warrior, mandatory. Ash Blossom, in my opinion, mandatory, like really good. The only reason to not play Ash would be to completely ignore Talents and Thrust. 1 Wailing with 2 Chambers seems to be the standard now. I'm okay with that. Prosperity, mandatory. 6 Triple Tactics and Herald of the Abyss is good and iffy at the same time. It's great going second in the mirror. Going first, when everyone is playing like the board breaker approach in Unchained, in the mirror match, you go first, you draw those cards. I have had them be dead in my hand very, very often. Look, I've heard some insane sentences this week. I believe I remember Pac saying something along the lines of, Spooky Dogwood is like Max C in the mirror match. First of all, that's an insane thing to say. Second of all, I am not sure if I like it. I'm also not sure if I hate it. I tend to not go into time very often, so I'm kind of hesitant on doing something like siding Dogwood again. Like I did it once or twice and it's never really paid off for me, so I'm not sure if I like it. The big downside of Marionette Might is that it's only for the mirror match, right? And that can be a problem because the format is super diverse. The one issue I have with this list is it doesn't have anything for Flunder, like literally nothing, which is a problem. You need to respect Flunder in your side deck. It has to be done. In any deck that plays Thrust, I really like the idea of going Metaverse and Zombie World. We've got a Labrynth submission, which seems to be a weird mix of Floodgate Labrynth and Furniture Labrynth. You're playing full Furniture, but then you're also playing some Floodgates, playing some Hand Traps, some Kaijus. Interesting. One thing you have to understand about Labrynth in this upcoming format. I think Labrynth is technically a pretty good deck. The only issue, and it's a pretty big issue, is that the deck is freaking so bad against Unchained. And the one thing you can do that's actually good in Labrynth, that's good against Unchained, is main deck Lord of the Heavenly Prison. Because you just leave that thing in your hand, and they can never pop their own set cards either. And they also can't pop your back row with like their escape. I would probably go with full Furniture version, triple Lord of the Heavenly Prison. Play like a minimal amount of actually good traps. Triple big, double welcome, 1 barrier, 1 Karma Cannon. Karma Cannon absolutely necessary to out like Noir sometimes. IDP is pretty good against Unchained. That card's busted. And that's pretty much all the traps you need. I don't even think you need Gozen. I don't even think you really need Skill Drain. It's only good going first. Going second, it's way too late for Skill Drain to do anything. The same is probably true for Gozen match. Gamma Seal, I don't love. I would just play hand traps, honestly. This might be one of the decks where you can actually still play Gamma. Take out the Gamma Seal, take out the Floodgates, play Lord of the Heavenly Prison, and play 1 more hand trap. That way you have 12 hand traps for going second. I think that's your best bet at making Labrynth work. Maybe even more Ku Klux, yeah. What about Ishizu? Ishizu Shufflers as discard for Furniture. I don't hate it. What you could do is instead of playing more hand traps, you could play more Ku Klux and Ishizu Shufflers. That would not be terrible. I don't hate that. All right, Dargans. We only have 2 Dargan lists. You are playing the 8 Bestials plus 3 Dubellions. You're playing the Red Eyes package. I think the Red Eyes package is 100% necessary. That being said, there is no reason not to play the 1 Chaos Space. I know it's a random one-of, but that card still needs to be here. You probably forgot. Other than that, I'm gonna be honest with you. This is just a very cookie-cutter dragon deck. Everything here is fine. The only thing that you're playing that is not quote-unquote standard is the Nocto Visions, which I think could be a little bit bricky. I think arguably you could play some less Bestials. I think 8 Bestials might be a little bit too much. I think you want to cut down on Druid Swarm slightly. The Bestials are not good in every matchup. I think it's better for consistency if you just play 1 or 2 less. I think Talents is a card that you can definitely play 3 of in Dragons. Yeah, those are my thoughts. Probably ends up putting it at more like 43-ish cards, 44-ish cards. That's what I would prefer. The other list has some other interesting stuff we can talk about. Let's just go over the cards that are not standard. Red Eyes Black Meteor Dragon together with Gamma and Driver. I personally haven't played it. It seems a little bit bricky, but I actually kind of like the idea. I think it's kind of cute. It even enables your like Bestials right off the bat, right? You're playing the 1/1, which in this case, you know, is phenomenal because Black Metal Dragon, if you play 2 targets for it, literally is a god card. Like, it's an actual god card. Like, that card's insane because you can add multiple times per turn. You're playing Rocket Synchron, which I have not been a huge fan of. You're playing Assault Synchron though, which every single fiber of my body wants you to tell that this is good. I actually think it is kind of fine in this deck, but I haven't tried it enough. I can't help but think regular Dragon Link is just a little bit more consistent and still powerful enough. Look, try it. All power to you. I like tuning in a Bestial deck because it has like a more than 50% chance to immediately turn on all your Bestials. If I draw Assault Synchron, tuning grabs a Rocket Synchron. That's why I add... Oh, right. It's also a Synchron. I forgot. That's the reasoning. Of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Non-engine. Book of Moon and Droplet. Personally, I don't like Droplet in Dragon Link. I don't think Dragon Link is a deck that can easily afford to just send away some cards. It doesn't have a whole lot of spell cards it can send. Book of Moon is fine, but I think it's worse than Book of Eclipse. You could play both. Maybe Talents, maybe Ashes. This is the thing, because you're playing Tuning, Assault Synchron, Rocket Synchron, Red Eyes Black Metal, Driver Gamma, you have less room for non-engine in this deck, which can be an issue. Against some decks, the Bestials are non-engine, which is fine. But against the decks where Bestials aren't great, you're gonna struggle. You literally have no out to Purrely making a Noir, except for Book of Moon, which is not even that good. I think Book of Eclipse is better. Maybe you just play Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon, because if you play against Purrely, 6 books are really good. And if you don't play against Purrely, Bestials can probably carry. I kind of like that. As far as Baldrake goes, you could main deck 1 instead of Druid Swarm just to have a good target for Magnamute. I liked Baldrake in the main deck because it can be a good interruption on the opponent's turn in the grind game. So I would try to fit 1 Baldrake in the main. All right, we have Spright, my love. There were multiples, but the only deck that people submitted was going second Spright. Literally not a single person submitted a going first Spright list. I think Spright is in a very weird spot in this format. It's surprisingly not that hard to break a Spright board in this format, so I kind of like the idea of going second with Spright. I will say there was one particular thing I liked about going second Spright in the last couple weeks when I saw a deck, and that was the Sky Striker cards. I thought that deck was actually pretty interesting. That being said, like the 2 red and 2 carrot, I think, help playing into boards. I think that's fine. Beaver good, Angler good, Fenrir... Yeah, I think I like it. I think the board breakers you're playing are kind of outdated. I think Raigeki and Darkhole were good a little bit ago when like a Rysard was a thing. I think right now they're not. I think Super Poly is not very good right now. I think it should be like Third Talents, maybe Ultimate Slayer, maybe even something like Cosmic Cyclones can be pretty valuable. Maybe you play Kaijus, maybe you play the Sky Striker cards. Like I said, I think the Sky Striker cards are pretty nice. Like even if you can't go to 3 spells in the graveyard, Engage is still like a super easy out to something like Wave King Caesar. You just Widow Anchor that shit, right? I really like playing 2 Engage, 1 Widow Anchor, 1 Hornet Drones. That seems base to me. And that's what I think about going second Spright. I think it's not bad. I think playing against this deck is kind of scary, unironically. The only issue, at some point in the tournament, people might know what you're playing and they might just send you first. I see you're side decking Ibli, but some people might already do that in like game 1 if they know what you're playing. So that could be an issue, but that's just something you have to accept. All right, we have Scareclaw submission. My problem here is that I unironically have never played an actual game of Scareclaw in my life. I've only played against this deck. So I think what I'm going to do here, in order to not say anything that's just chatting, I'm going to evaluate your non-engine, right? So you're not playing Prosperity for budget reasons, which is fine. I assume you're also not playing Thrust for the same reasoning, which is fine. One thing you could play, though, which I don't really see a reason not to, is you could play the adventure cards, right? Aren't the adventure cards really good in this deck? I felt like they were always pretty good when I played against it. Ghost Ogre is surprisingly not bad in this format, but I don't think I would main deck it. The same is true for Droll and Lockbird. I think both of those cards are better off in the side deck, and that would make room for the adventure package, right? I think I would do that. Okay, now we are getting to the rogue deck section. First things first, we have a Resonator deck. Resonator Bestial. Surprisingly, actually, I have looked into the Resonator cards a little bit, and the deck does have some impressive one-card combos, actually. However, I have tested the deck, and I've also tested against the deck. I've made the experience that there's way too many hand traps that straight up murder this deck. The hand traps aren't even just good against this deck, they murder it, which is why I didn't really bother testing it much more. As far as your list goes, I think it's pretty solid. I don't think you need 2 creation resonators. I think that card's a one-of. The level 1 resonator that adds back from the graveyard is pretty good. I think it's Synchron Resonator. I think that one's pretty good. You should probably play that. Prosperity, if it's not for budget reasons, should probably be a 3-of. Talents, I'm a big fan of, because like I said, you struggle against hand traps, so when you get ashed, you can at least like try to draw extenders. I haven't tried this deck with the Bestials in it, so I'm not sure if you need both Regained and Beast. It seems kind of bricky to play both, and you don't want to go too far over 40, but it's okay. Other than that, non-engine Ash Imperm is fine. Talents is good. You have very low amount of non-engine, especially if you're playing against a deck where Bestials aren't that great. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on Resonators, but keep in mind, I haven't played the deck that much. Vanquish Soul, I am afraid to inform everybody, has unfortunately not turned out to be that super cool based mid-range deck in Yu-Gi-Oh that I was hoping it would be. I wanted it to be a good deck, man. I wanted it to be. But the deck is just too fair, and at the same time, not even that consistent, because you need to open Raisin or your deck sucks. Still, let's evaluate the cards you put into this deck. One of Pluton, I think, is unfortunately necessary until we get the new Fire Guy. When we get the new Fire Guy, literally Vanquish Soul Pluton will never see play ever again. I personally like 3 values, but 2 is fine. I'm not a big fan of Dogoran, but it's okay. Shifter is kind of Troll Despair, but I get it. 1 Continue, no book is interesting, especially because you play Desires. Like 2 Desires with 1 target for Madlove is kind of crazy. I think you probably play more. I mean, it's a fine deck list. The one thing I will say, I kind of like playing Bestials, and I kind of like playing Crow in it. This deck has inherent synergy with like Dark non-engine, right? They're not good in every matchup, but even in the matchups where they're not super strong, you can still reveal them for your card effects. So I kind of like that. Maybe cut Shifter for those. I don't know. We only had 1 singular submission for Rescue Ace. Everything up until like here is pretty much standard, right? I think Fire Engine is a card that not everyone plays. You have 12 non-engine. You decided to go for Fenrir, Ash, Eclipse, Imperm. Honestly, I really like that. I think that's a pretty solid lineup for non-engine for Rescue Ace. Side decking Ibli for going first. I hate to admit that I think that's pretty good, even though I will say most people have at least been considering playing an out to Ibli. So you might want to, you know, think twice about siding it in a specific matchup. But the card is so ignorant, right? I don't like those. I think if you are worried about Evenly and Lightning Storm, just go for Ibli, and that should be fine. If they have the one of Duster, they have the one of Duster. I don't think it's correct to play around that. I think just go Ibli and then ignore everything from that point on. Can this deck really use Droplet that well? It doesn't seem like a deck that can make use of Droplet like in a great way. I don't think this is a deck that can really spare a couple of cards from their hand. That's not how I view it, at least. If it helps unbricking, I'm all for it, but I'm not super convinced by it. Those 2, I think you could cut for something else. Something like Cosmic is looking solid. Actually, you don't have that much against Purrely. You might want to look at something like Xyz's Encore, because that card's been getting expensive. If it's budget reasons, then you could do something like Herald of the Abyss or Kaiju's. Are you spoiling your deck list for the YCS? Yes, all of these are my deck lists for the YCS. Every single one of them. Let's round it off with this one, because I actually know some of the Mikanko cards now. So we have a submission for obviously Blind Second Mikanko here. I think it's Blind Second. Now that I've opened it, I'm realizing I don't have that much to say about it. I think you can play 1 less Fire Dance. I don't think 2 Fiery Dances is necessary. I don't think Ash should be in this deck. Ash is only good in like grindy games. So you might as well just not play into Talents, not play into Thrust, and just break their board, right? Let them make their board and try to break it. That's what I would suggest. That leaves you with 38 cards. I don't know if there's another consistency card available. Not sure. But that's literally the only feedback I have on Mikanko. I don't think the deck is super well positioned in a best of 3 format. Even in Master Duel, where it's a best of 1, I still didn't really like the deck, even though it's probably a lot better than what I made out of it because I played it for the very first time. Actually, you can play Duster. Why are you not playing Duster? Why is there Lightning Storm in the main deck but no Duster? I think Duster should be here. Take out the 3 Ashes and play Duster. That's my advice. I'm proud of you, chat. I'm proud of you. No one submitted MathMech this time. Well done. Well done. That's my chat. Okay, I guess we can round it off with Exosister. All right, so you're saying I need help for my YCS Dortmund deck list. Sky Striker Engine is good into Purrely Unchained, I guess. Also, Magnifica with traps and Eagle Booster setup feels kind of good. I think people know Exosister will become a bit better after the list, but they do not really prepare for it. I don't own Thrust, sadly. Even the main instead of Gozen might be good, but I keep changing them around. Okay. Sky Striker package good into Purrely and Unchained, you say? Let me think about that for a second. Let's go over the more obvious stuff first. Isn't there one more? Which one are you not playing? Irene. Okay, Sophia mentions Irene. Maybe you want one of them? Aratama, Sakitama. Big fan of those cards in this deck. I think they're pretty good here. You're playing 3 traps, which honestly, low-key, even though I always hate playing like trap cards in my decks, I think Exosister is one of the decks where you actually might want them. Like, I really enjoyed hard drawing 1 or 2 trap cards because it just made it so you would not care about resolving some of your stuff. You still set up the traps. Shifter is obviously one of the main selling points of the deck. Evenly, I don't like at all. Talents is mediocre in this deck particularly because you're playing Prosperity, so you can't always draw. And then the Sky Striker package, I don't really know what you're referring to when you say those are good into Unchained and Purrely. Like, I agree, in a perfect world where you can set up a Magnifica, right? Putting a freaking Eagle Booster behind it is pretty damn strong. But I don't think you should worry about the games where you get to Magnifica. Because if you're getting to Magnifica, your deck is already fine. So I don't like the Eagle Booster that much. The Widow Anchor is fine, I guess. But it's also not great, and you will never draw off of Engage, so I don't like this package. So I think you just want to take out the Evenlies, the Talents, the Engages, and the Anchor and Eagle Booster for 8 other non-engine. 3rd Imperm, 2nd Vadis, maybe 1 Irene. You can do more hand traps, like Crow is fine in this deck. You can do Eclipse. That's roughly what I would do. I don't like Gozen Match in the main deck because it's so bad going second, and you already play a bunch of traps that are bad going second. I would encourage you to try out Gravekeeper's Inscription, maybe, because Gravekeeper's Inscription is pretty toxic against Unchained. And that's that. We haven't looked at every single deck that every one of you submitted because that simply takes up way too much time. I hope the majority of you still got something out of that. You know, either I talked about your specific deck, or, I mean, we talked about non-engine a lot in general today, right? That's the big takeaway from this, is that a lot of the things that we talked about today apply to a lot of different decks, right? All you need to do is like take the information and apply it to your specific deck that you are playing, and I think it should be helpful for every single one of you. Still, thank you for everyone that submitted a deck. I hope you enjoyed the Deck Doctor this time around. I'm not sure if we're going to turn this into a YouTube video, but if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. And yeah, everyone, best of luck at YCS Dortmund. See you guys there, and thank you for watching. All right.